Hey there, Tony here from A004 Studios. In today's devlog, we're going to be going over some of the problems I ran into last week, exporting animations from Blender and importing them into Unreal.
I thought I had import working correctly, but it turned out it was just the skeletal mesh that imported correctly, and the animations were broken. The animations had bone scale issues, or issues with the mesh being too big. I also had issues with the root motion not being applied correctly, so the character wasn't pivoting after you moved your arms beyond the 90 degrees. This problem delayed my video log last week as I had planned on making a short with a new animation and talk about the import process, but lost track of time trying to fix the issue and didn't have time to get the video out. My goal was to start on the modules for each biome and start the damage and death effects as well, but that also got pushed back. This happens sometimes in game dev, and the Blender to Unreal pipeline is tricky, so I'm glad I have it resolved now, and I'm hoping that I don't run into any more major issues that set me back, fingers crossed. So I'll start by showing you some of the issues I ran into in Unreal after importing. I had two major problems. The first was that the bones were way too big, and I could see in Unreal that they were importing with a scale applied, which I didn't like and was causing me some problems. The second was that the mesh would be too big or the bones too small, but either way this caused the mesh to be distorted after importing. It turns out that the issue was due to my skeleton in Blender being too small, but just increasing the size made it bigger when importing into Unreal as well. After a lot of testing and recreating the animations multiple times at different scales, I honed in on the right settings, which I'll go over along with the different plugins that I used. Essentially, I had to scale everything up in Blender, and when I did the export to FBX, I would actually have to set the export to have a scale value that was the opposite. I used one plugin where you can pay what you can afford, free if necessary, called GameRig Tools. I also used the Rococo plugin to copy animations between armatures, which I'll leave the links for both in the description below. I used the GameRig Tools plugin to make the initial skeleton and adjust it to my Unreal character on the tweak layer. You'll have to make sure that the plugin is installed and enabled for it to work. To do that, you just need to go to Edit, Preferences, Plugins, and search for the Game Rig Tools and enable it, and then also go through the install procedure if you haven't already. I used this tutorial to show me how to use the plugin initially, but it only described getting a custom model mapped onto the Unreal skeleton, not a way to add animations and have them get imported as well. I didn't scale the character up initially, which was part of the reasons I had issues, so I'd recommend scaling everything up by a factor of 100 and applying before moving on to the next step. You'll also want to use pose mode to make all your adjustments to the skeleton, and then pop out so that you can hit the apply rig button, and that'll be transferring those tweaks over to the deform and Unreal layer. I set up IK on the deform layer and used it to create some animations. I tried on the Unreal layer initially, but since the bones are all weird directions, you can't point the IK to mirrored positions on each side. I found that after creating animations using IK, you could make them into new layers so that the bones actually had rotations and translations baked into them instead of being driven by the IK. Once I baked them, I could use the Rococo plugin to map them to the Unreal skeleton, but you have to turn off IK for it to copy correctly. You also have to have the source and target skeletons visible, with the target being highlighted and the source having the animation to copy selected. I also had to use these settings to export. Because we scaled it up by 100, we need to export it scaled down by the same factor. I'm not sure why you have to do it this way, but it's the only way Unreal seems to like it. Now that I've exported in Blender, I can import in Unreal by selecting SK Mannequin Skeleton, checking for importing animations, and leaving the rest as defaults. If you use this process, you should have a mesh skeleton and animations imported correctly. I also had to do some interesting things with weight painting and copying of weights from a wrapped mesh to the parts so they would deform uniformly and not move away from each other, but I'll touch more on that on another day. So this is the issue that I've been contending with over the last couple of weeks, but things are working better now, so I'm on track to get my store page out in about a month. Well, hopefully, fingers crossed. Last thing I want to do is just quickly go over some of the tools I use and what I have open on a day-to-day basis. Here I have my Trello board and my calendar. I also typically have my Gmail up for some of the things that come in that way. I also have GitHub Desktop. This is where I commit my stuff to my GitHub page repository. I do pay for some extra storage so that I can just push up new assets that are really big. That just makes my life a whole lot easier. This is Rider. I use it instead of Visual Studio. If you're going to be going deep into C++, I'd recommend using it. I prefer it. It seems to work really well and has a lot less bugs than when trying to use Visual Studio with Unreal. I do have Unreal open, of course, all the time, working on that, building out the game. When I'm working on animations, I definitely work through Blender here a lot, setting things up, making animations, and then using that import process I just described to go through everything. I use Obsidian to essentially write everything out and do visual timelines and things like that. So I find it's a really nice tool to just put my thoughts out, lay them out in a nice way that I can see everything. This is I only really have open when I'm writing. Same with these other two. I only really bring them up when I'm actually needing them for specific tasks. So Photoshop, I'll make some minor edits to different 2D sprites and things like that. Make my thumbnails, things like that in here. And the last one is DaVinci Resolve, which I use for my editing software. So that's everything.
That's it for this devlog. These videos where I do screen sharing are a little easier for me, so hopefully I'll be able to do this more consistently. I do want to make them once a week, but if that doesn't work out, then I might end up going to one every 2 weeks. We're going to play it by ear, but thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.